Duke Silas Thorne was the most feared man in the north, known for a heart as cold as the stone walls of his castle. When he walked into the town's common square, he didn't come for gold or land. He came to buy a wife. Standing on a wooden platform was a woman labeled damaged goods, her face hidden behind a thick, heavy black veil that never moved. The crowd mocked her, and her own father had disowned her for a secret she wouldn't tell. Silas threw a heavy bag of gold at the auctioneer's feet without even asking her name. He thought he was buying a servant to manage his empty halls, but when the wind caught that veil for just a second, Silas saw a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. He didn't realize that by saving her, he had just brought the most dangerous secret in the kingdom into his bedroom. Before we get into this incredible story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss a single second of this journey, so make sure you watch until the very end. Hour 1. The Bargain of Blood and Gold. Silas Thorne dragged the veiled woman toward his carriage. He didn't speak to her, and she didn't make a sound. The townspeople whispered that she was deformed or cursed. Silas didn't care about curses because his own life was already a nightmare. He was a war hero who hated the king he served. He needed a wife only to fulfill a legal requirement to keep his lands. He told the woman she would have her own room and he would never bother her. She simply nodded, her hands shaking under her tattered sleeves. They arrived at the Blackwood estate, a place where the sun never seemed to shine. Silas showed the woman, whose name he discovered was Clara, to a cold room in the west wing. He told her she must keep the veil on in front of the servants. He didn't want the staff gossiping about his bargain bride. Clara spent her first 3 days in total silence. She cleaned her own room and ate only when the tray was left outside her door. Silas watched her from the shadows of the hallway, wondering why she never cried. One night, Silas heard a strange sound coming from the kitchen. He found Clara standing by the hearth, trying to warm her hands. The veil was still pinned tightly to her hair. He noticed she walked with a slight limp that she tried to hide. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. He was a rich man, and she looked like she was starving. He ordered the cook to prepare the best meats and breads for her. He told himself he was just protecting his investment. Silas decided to have dinner with her on the 5th night. The table was long, and the candles were low. Clara sat at the far end, the black lace of her veil dipping into her water glass. Silas asked her why her father had sold her. Clara's voice was low and steady. She said her father needed the money to pay a gambling debt and that she was no longer useful to the family. Silas slammed his fist on the table. He hated men who traded their blood for coins. The next day, Silas brought a doctor to the house. He wanted Clara's limp looked at. Clara panicked and backed into a corner, clutching her veil. She begged him not to make her take it off. Silas saw the raw terror in her posture. He dismissed the doctor and told Clara he wouldn't force her. But he made a mental note. She wasn't hiding a deformity. She was hiding a memory. He started to feel a protective rage building in his chest for this stranger. Silas began to leave gifts outside her door. Not jewelry or silk, but things she could use. A warm wool blanket, a set of oil paints, and a sturdy cane made of oak. He saw her through the cracked door using the cane to walk in the garden. She moved with a grace that didn't match a rejected woman. He realized she was educated. She knew how to tend to the rare herbs in his garden that his own gardeners had killed. He was becoming obsessed with her movements. At the end of the first month, a messenger arrived from the king. The king wanted to meet the duke's new bride at the upcoming winter ball. Silas looked at Clara, who was standing by the window. He knew she couldn't go in a veil without causing a scandal. He walked up to her and reached for the pin holding the lace. Clara froze. Silas promised he wouldn't judge her. He pulled the veil back, and his heart stopped. Her face wasn't scarred or ugly. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, but across her cheek was a brand, the mark of a traitor to the crown. Silas stared at the mark on Clara's face. It was a small, burned symbol of a falling star. In this kingdom, that mark meant she had tried to kill a member of the royal family. Silas knew the law. He should turn her in. He should execute her himself to prove his loyalty. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw no evil. He saw the eyes of a woman who had been framed. Clara fell to her knees and told him to kill her quickly. Instead of calling the guards, Silas closed the heavy oak doors and locked them. He told Clara that if anyone saw that mark, they would both be burned at the stake. He asked her for the truth. Clara explained that she had discovered the king's son was poisoning the queen. When she tried to switch the glasses, she was caught. The prince branded her himself and told her family he would kill them all if she ever spoke. Her father sold her to keep the family safe. Silas felt a cold fire in his veins. He had served that prince in 3 wars. He knew the man was a coward, but he didn't know he was a murderer. Silas told Clara she was no longer his prisoner.
She was his ally.
He decided they would play a dangerous game. They would go to the winter ball, but they would use makeup and clever jewelry to hide the mark. He spent the next few weeks training her to carry herself like a duchess. The tension in the house shifted. They were no longer master and servant. They were 2 people holding a bomb that could go off at any second. Silas found himself staying up late talking to her. He learned she loved poetry and hated the cold. He found himself touching her hand more than necessary. The obsessed feeling from before had turned into a deep, agonizing need to keep her breathing. He stopped sleeping in his own wing and moved to the room next to hers. One afternoon, a group of knights rode onto the property. They said they were looking for a fugitive. Silas stood on the porch with his sword drawn. He told them his wife was resting and not to be disturbed. The lead knight looked suspicious. He asked why the duke had bought a woman from an auction. Silas lied with a smile, saying he liked a woman who was a challenge. The knights left, but Silas knew they would be back. The clock was ticking. Clara started to trust him. She stopped flinching when he moved his arms. One night, she touched the scar on his shoulder from the war. She told him he wasn't the monster the world said he was. Silas felt his stone heart cracking. He wanted to kiss her, but he knew she was still healing from the trauma of her past. He decided he would wait forever if he had to. He bought her a dress of deep emerald silk for the ball, designed to cover her neck and part of her cheek. The night before the ball, Silas gave Clara a necklace. It was a massive sapphire that hung right over the branded mark. It was so bright it drew the eye away from the skin. He told her she was the bravest person he had ever met. Clara looked at him and said she didn't want to go to the ball for herself. She wanted to go for him. She didn't want him to lose his lands because of her. Silas realized then that he didn't care about the lands anymore. He only cared about her. Hour 3. The Dance of Shadows. They arrived at the palace in a gold-trimmed carriage. Silas could feel Clara shaking next to him. He took her hand and squeezed it. He told her to look at everyone like they were beneath her. When they entered the ballroom, the music stopped. Every eye was on the Duke and his mysterious bride. The prince was there, standing at the top of the stairs. He looked at Clara with a hungry, predatory gaze. He didn't recognize her at first because of the makeup and the sapphire. The prince approached them and asked for a dance with the new duchess. Silas felt his grip tighten on his sword hilt. He wanted to refuse, but Clara gave him a look. She stepped into the prince's arms. Silas watched from the edge of the room, his hand never leaving his weapon. He saw the prince whisper something in her ear. Clara turned pale, but she kept dancing. She was a better actress than Silas ever imagined. After the dance, Clara found Silas in the garden. She told him the prince had recognized her scent. He had smelled the lavender oil she always used. He told her he would meet her in the library in 10 minutes or he would have Silas arrested for treason. Silas told Clara to stay put and let him handle it. But Clara refused. She said she had a plan to get the prince to confess. She needed Silas to hide behind the curtains with a witness. Silas hated the plan, but he knew it was the only way to be free. He grabbed the king's most trusted advisor and dragged him to the library, forcing him to hide. Clara walked into the room alone. The prince was waiting. He laughed and told her he should have killed her instead of branding her. He admitted to poisoning the queen because she was going to change the line of succession. He reached out to grab Clara's face to mock the mark. Silas wanted to jump out and kill the prince right then, but he waited. The advisor heard everything. Just as the prince pulled a small dagger to finish the job, the advisor stepped out. The prince froze. The advisor called the royal guard. The prince was taken away in chains, screaming that he would have them all executed. Silas ran to Clara and pulled her into his arms. He didn't care who was watching. He thought they had finally won. The king, however, was a broken man. He was devastated by his son's betrayal, but he was also proud. He couldn't have the public knowing his son was a murderer. He decided to exile the prince, but he told Silas that Clara still bore the mark of a traitor. Even if she was innocent, the law said she couldn't be a duchess. He ordered Silas to annul the marriage and send her away, or Silas would lose everything. Silas looked at the king and did something no one expected. Silas took off his own signet ring and threw it on the floor. He told the king he could keep the titles, the castle, and the gold. He took Clara's hand and led her out of the palace. They walked out of the front gates with nothing but the clothes on their backs. For the first time, Clara wasn't wearing a veil, and Silas wasn't wearing a scowl. They were free, but they were now the most wanted people in the country. Silas and Clara fled to the northern mountains where the snow was thick and the paths were dangerous. They found an abandoned hunter's cabin. Silas used his bare hands to chop wood and fix the roof. He was a man used to servants, but he worked until his fingers bled to make sure Clara was warm. They lived on dried meat and melted snow. Clara started to teach Silas how to cook over an open flame. They were poor, but they were happy. One morning, Silas saw smoke on the horizon. The king hadn't let them go. He had sent a group of bounty hunters to finish what the prince started. The king wanted all witnesses to the prince's crime dead. Silas knew they couldn't stay in the cabin. He packed their few belongings and led Clara deeper into the woods. He knew a secret pass that led to the sea, where they could catch a boat to a new land. The bounty hunters caught up to them at the edge of a frozen river. There were 6 of them, all armed with crossbows. Silas told Clara to run across the ice while he held them off. Clara refused to leave him. She picked up a heavy branch and stood by his side. Silas fought like a demon. He took an arrow to the shoulder but didn't stop. He was fighting for the only thing that made his life worth living. As the ice began to crack under the weight of the fight, Silas managed to disarm the last hunter. But the ice gave way. Silas fell into the freezing water. The current was strong, pulling him under the frozen sheets. Clara screamed and jumped in after him. She wasn't a strong swimmer, but she grabbed his coat and pulled with everything she had. She dragged him to the shore, both of them shivering and near death. They found a small cave and huddled together for warmth. Silas was drifting in and out of consciousness. Clara took off her wet clothes and wrapped herself around him, using her body heat to keep his heart beating. She whispered stories to him all night. She told him about the children she wanted to have and the farm they would own. She told him she loved him. Silas heard her, and it gave him the strength to stay alive. When the sun rose, they were both still breathing. Silas looked at Clara and saw that the cold had turned her skin blue, but her eyes were bright. He realized he had bought a bride at an auction, but he had ended up with a savior. He promised her that if they made it to the sea, he would never let her go again. They started the long walk toward the coast, leaning on each other. Every step was a struggle, but they didn't stop. They reached the port city of Oakhaven. Silas sold the sapphire necklace, the one that had hidden her mark, to pay for passage on a ship. The jeweler recognized the gem and almost called the guards, but Silas gave him a look that promised a quick death. They boarded a ship called the Silent Moon just as the sun was setting. As the ship pulled away from the docks, Silas watched his old kingdom disappear. He felt no regret. The ship took them to a distant land where no one cared about marks or kings. They bought a small plot of land near a cliff overlooking the ocean. Silas built a house with a wide porch. He became a blacksmith, and Clara opened a small school for the village children. For 2 years, they lived in peace. The mark on Clara's face faded until it was just a pale shadow. She no longer wore a veil. She was the most loved woman in the village. One day, A stranger arrived in town. He was an old man with a heavy cloak. He came to Silas's forge and asked for a sword to be repaired. Silas looked at the man's hands and saw the royal seal of the queen. Silas grabbed the man by the throat. He thought the king had finally found them, but the old man gasped out that he wasn't there to kill them. He was there to bring news. The king was dead, and the queen had taken the throne. The queen had searched for them to apologize. She had found the evidence of her son's crimes and had officially pardoned Clara. She wanted them to return to the north and reclaim their titles. Silas looked at the house he had built with his own hands. He looked at Clara, who was playing with a small toddler in the yard, their son. He realized he didn't want the castle. He didn't want the gold. He had already found his kingdom in the middle of nowhere. Silas told the messenger to tell the queen that the duke and duchess were dead. He told him to say they had drowned in the frozen river. The messenger looked at the happy family and understood. He took the broken sword and left, promising to keep their secret. Silas went back to his work, his heart full. He had gone from a man who bought a woman to a man who had been saved by her. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip into the sea, Clara turned to Silas. She told him there was one thing she had never told him. She told him that the day of the auction, she had prayed for someone to buy her who would be strong enough to handle her truth. She said she had seen him in the crowd and chose him before he ever threw the gold. She had intentionally let the wind lift her veil for that 1 second to get his attention. Silas laughed, a deep, genuine sound. He realized he hadn't been the one in control at all. He had been captured by her the moment he saw her. He kissed her, and for the first time in years, there was no fear, no danger, and no secrets. They were just two people who had survived the dark to find the light. The brand on her face was no longer a mark of a traitor. It was a badge of honor for the woman who had brought a duke to his knees. They lived the rest of their lives in that small village. Their children grew up strong and kind. Silas never picked up a sword again, except to show his son how to defend what he loved. The story of the Duke and his veiled bride became a local legend, a tale told to remind people that beauty isn't what you see on the surface, but the fire that burns underneath. Silas Thorne died an old man, holding the hand of the woman he once bought for a bag of gold. This story reminds us that true love isn't about what we have, but who we are willing to become for someone else. If you were moved by Silas and Clara's journey, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. What part of their story touched you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching until the very end.